Hello, Yakri here with another Warframe video. This time I want to talk about why corrosive projection is so freaking overpowered in Warframe and why so many people consider it essential for doing high-level content. So what I've got here is a calculator set up with the EHP calculations for Warframe. I've added in some math of my own to automatically calculate how much damage reduction enemies still have after factoring in one corrosive projection. I can also modify the number of corrosive projections up here, and how much percentile damage you gain, and then how much effective damage you gain, which means the relative size of that percentile gain compared to how much damage you were doing before. So in other words, this is the percentile increase in your damage because of corrosive projection. And this is set up for a Grineer heavy unit. I'll try butchers as well after a bit and show you what that looks like as well. But so let's just look at this. This is against really low-level bombards, and this is also why bombards and heavy gunners among the Grineer are so busted. So they have a really high base HP and really high base armor. So right at level 8, they have 62.5% damage reduction, and corrosive projection lets you deal 8% more damage, which equates to 23% damage boost with all your abilities. Now this includes Warframe abilities. All abilities are affected by damage reduction from armor, and this is just at level 8. Now let's say we bump up the level to level 80. This goes up to 39%, and let's say we're in a level 3 sortie and we're fighting level 120 enemies. Now it goes up to 41% bonus damage. And you'll notice that their damage reduction baseline is 97.13%. That is very high. You're not dealing a whole lot of your weapon's total damage to heavy units. So what happens, for example, if we have, let's say, 2 corrosive projections? Well, then 40%, you're dealing, only 40% of their armor is still being used. This gives you a 139% effective damage boost. Well, what if you have 3 corrosive projections? This goes up to 694%. And if you have 3 corrosive projections, or you use, what's that called, coaction drift, you can get to 100% armor reduction, which gives you 3,379% effective bonus damage. That would be 33 times the damage you would deal with no corrosive projections at all. So, as you can imagine, this is the most powerful damage boosting aura against high-level enemies, with an asterisk on it. That asterisk is if you have another way to strip armor, then this loses a lot of value, particularly if it's a good or like even instant way to strip armor. Using a weapon like the Amperex only gains like maybe 1 or 2 seconds of time faster that it kills enemies if you have 4x corrosive projection, because it corrosive procs so quickly it will completely strip enemy armor, which incidentally is why it's so good with a high status corrosive damage only build, for example, because you will effectively get this 33 times damage multiplier by using a weapon that can fully strip enemy armor versus one that can't if you have no other means of removing armor. So that's also why the corrosive damage type is so overpowered. Because there are enemies with an armor type, right, among the infested and corpus units. It's not as bad as the Grineer heavies, but each faction does have at least one unit type with armor, and you're going to have a similar problem against those unit types as you do versus the heavy gunners. It won't be quite as bad, but it's pretty bad. So this is why everybody uses corrosive projection. And why there's only a couple other, well, it's part of the reason why there's a couple other mods worth using. Part of it is that the DE has been very stingy with the mods. Mods like Rifle Amp is garbage. Like, it's just shit. Because the base stats are absurdly low, like laughably low. And what about the Toxic Resist aura? That's terrible. These mods are not very good, and Energy Siphon used to be fairly decent, but with Xeneric, Energy Siphon should probably be like 2 energy per second per aura for it to like compete with other things that exist in the game now. So anyway, the point is, this is why corrosive projection is so ridiculously overpowered, and personally I feel it should be massively nerfed or completely removed from the game. and probably that's also why a damage rework needs to happen, because as good as other damage types are, and though they have niche roles, if you are playing solo, for example, and you don't have access to 4 corrosive projections, corrosive damage procs become incredibly valuable compared to other things you can do with your weapons. Now let me talk about the asterisks to this, right? Because there are some big asterisks. So there's that corrosive damage one, and there's also the fact that if you can one-shot enemies anyway, getting this huge damage boost isn't worth a whole lot. That's why gas damage builds are so good, and I've talked about that previously. Like if you look at my video for my Lanka build, or my video where I actually talk about gas procs, you can one-shot a level 120 enemy while your weapon is at 97% damage reduction. You don't have any CP. Then getting a 33 times damage multiplier doesn't matter. The enemy will be equally dead. And having gas damage instead of corrosive for that damage or that armor reduction is better than having the armor reduction. Even if the armor reduction results in a huge amount more damage, you're still one-shotting the enemy. So having the proc that gives you an AoE around them and lets you kill additional enemies with the same number of shots, same amount of time, that's more valuable, right? So that's why there are some damage types that have a bit of value. That's also why like cold and magnetic are not worth a whole lot in Warframe. Part of the reason anyway. Like slowing down enemies isn't worth a whole lot when you probably just want to instantly kill them anyway. So that's the issue with cold. And magnetic proccing enemies doesn't really do anything to them except reduce their shields or something. It doesn't do anything useful at all. And the damage type is kind of irrelevant when you could be using gas or viral or toxic or corrosive, right? So that's one of the problems there. So I also wanted to talk about something in general, which is that a lot of people seem to think, though, that dash polarity is the way to go when you're forming your Warframes. And this was kind of the case in the past, kinda, sorta. There were, I feel, fewer situations in Warframe's past where rage was useful because of like just what people did most of the time, and there were fewer situations where, or more situations where energy siphon was useful and growing power didn't exist. So we have a little bit of a different situation now where there's at least one mod of each polarity that you would like to use. So corrosive projection is the most OP aura. That's just a given, right? But Steel Charge, Rejuvenation, and Growing Power, those 3 auras are actually worth using in different situations. So Rejuvenation is just kind of a utility thing where, you know, if you don't need to boost your damage, then there's no reason to run not Growing Power. If you don't need to boost your damage, there's no reason to run Steel Charge or corrosive projection, but you might still need to heal yourself in certain situations where you don't actually need the damage boost, maybe because you intend to take damage in order to gain energy through rage, and you don't want to use up a slot on your melee weapon for life strike or something like that, right? So it's a convenient utility thing. I don't use it very often, but I have used it once in a while. Growing Power is often useful when corrosive projection wouldn't be, because it can do things besides boost your damage. Certain things on different Warframes scale off of power strength that are not direct damage bonuses or are indirect bonuses. For example, one thing you could do is use Growing Power to achieve a 100% armor strip from Warframes that can do that, which would negate the need for corrosive projection while also boosting your other abilities and those of your allies damage-wise, right? So that's one time where it's more useful. Corrosive or Steel Charge is effectively a was it like a 20% damage increase at, I can't remember what level it was. At like level 80 enemies or something, compared to what was this? Like 1x CP is like slightly better, but not a lot better than Steel Charge against like level 80 enemies. So for example, if you're playing Excalibur with Chromatic Blade, you should probably have, especially if you're playing solo, right? So you should probably have corrosive, and you're going to get a lot of corrosive procs. Now, after a couple corrosive procs, the value of one corrosive projection in your aura slot will go down, whereas the value of, oh, that's right, Steel Charge is just a 20% damage increase overall, because it's not as much as it looks like, because it's additive with pressure point. If you have max prime pressure point, it's effectively a 1/3 damage increase, or 1/3 of its, yeah. Wait, So 1/3 damage increase, 20% of your total damage, right? Because 60%, 1/3 of 60% is 20. I think I'm doing that right, or maybe it's a 33% damage increase. All right, I'm not 100% confident on that, but in any case, it's still less than Corrosive Projection initially. However, after you've Corrosive procced an enemy maybe 2 times, it's going to be a larger damage boost than Corrosive Projection is, because the relative value of Corrosive Projection, this effective damage gained, goes down as the enemy's armor goes down. Now that has to do with how Corrosive Projection and Corrosive procs stack. So Corrosive procs reduce permanently an enemy's total armor. Then whatever that new total is, Corrosive Projection is going to chunk 30% off the top of that. So if the enemy's new total armor is 100, Corrosive Projection is going to be taking 30 armor off of that. So the amount of accurate, like flat armor that is being reduced by Corrosive Projection itself goes down the more the enemy's total armor goes down, because it's percentile. Which means, though, that the net gain that you're getting goes down as the enemy's total armor goes down, right? If you get it back to 500, like they were at level 8, it's a 23% bonus. And eventually, you're going to strip their armor completely and lose all benefit from Corrosive Projection. And eventually, it can be quite fast versus lower level enemies. And additionally, versus enemies that are not heavies, you're going to get less benefit. And of course, there are enemy types that don't have armor, and then Steel Charge is better all along. So that's like one niche example. I think Excalibur is the only Warframe that should bother with Steel Charge. Maybe Volt as well, if you, depending on the weapon you're using, right? If you used a high status corrosive weapon, I think because of his high attack speed, Volt or Valkyr could also make use of it this way. Yeah, and growing power, of course, if you can get some benefit out of it that either replaces Corrosive Projection or enhances something that's not damage that is more important to you than just getting more damage, then it's better. Especially at levels where if you're still going to be one-shotting enemies anyway, it doesn't make a big difference. And if you get some utility benefit, then that's better. So what's my point with all this? Well, I've seen some people advising that you take a dash polarity in your aura slot. That's okay if you don't really want to max out the Warframe and you don't think that you can ever have a use for Rejuvenation, Steel Charge, or Growing Power. Now, there are some Warframes where that's probably true, like Valbon is a fairly safe pick. Definitely doesn't have any use for Steel Charge. Definitely doesn't have any use for Growing Power. And Rejuvenation is kind of like, well, yeah, it would be a niche nifty thing, but maybe you just take some health pizzas instead. And you deal with it. So that's kind of fine. But like with Mesa, for example, there's reasons why you might want to use Growing Power or Corrosive Projection, depending on what kind of enemies you're dealing with. Similar thing for Mag. I think I'd rather have Growing Power a lot of the time with Mag, because I'm just going to armor strip enemies completely. And so Corrosive Projection doesn't really matter. Yeah, so it's a little situational. So what you can do instead is that if you just invest like 2 additional forma into any frame, you can clear the polarity entirely and just have a blank polarity there. That's what I do if I want to max out a frame. If I don't want to max it out, then yeah, maybe dash polarity is more worth it. But that was like a kind of a addendum, actually, when I thought about this some more, because I thought, people probably don't realize just how OP Corrosive Projection is, right? Like even at level 8, right, it's 160% increase in your damage if you have 4 of them. And, of course, as you get up to like level 200 enemies, like look at this, it's 8,400%. Armor is just completely broken in this game. Corrosive Projection is massively overpowered. But, if you want to get high level content done effectively, this is what you want. This is what you want to have. You want to have 4x Corrosive Projection. It's incredibly important. Once you reach content, like once you reach enemies that you couldn't one-shot without Corrosive Projection, it becomes very, very helpful. And as you can see, like look at this here. So these enemies have scaled health of 166,000, scaled armor of 25,200, right? So I don't think I actually have a calculation for their EHP here. So let's go with so their reduction, what is it? Their EHP is reduction times it's like the inverse, right? So hold on, why am I brain farting here? The reduction divided by 98%, divided by 0.13, right? reduction, it's divided by the amount of damage you do. Wait, no, the reduction, not reduction, it's their health, their scaled health. Scaled health divided by 0.1. 0.01. It's 98.83, right? So I'm trying to just do this in my head. 0.1. That would be 1.7, right? So that's 14. Is that 14 million? I think. Yeah, 14 million health. So level 200 heavy gunners have 14 million health without corrosive projection, and they have 166,000 health with 4x corrosive projection. If I'm doing that right. I could have made a mistake. Math isn't really actually my strong suit, despite doing a lot of videos on mathy things in Warframe. But yeah, it's a big difference. It is a huge difference that it makes. Yeah, so that's why you use it versus higher level enemies, and that's why everyone bitches about Warframe scaling. If you didn't know, so I think I'll just conclude the video there. Get a copy of Corrosive Projection as soon as you can. It should help you a lot in Sanctuary Onslaught, but of course, you know, keep in mind, you shouldn't lock yourself into a dash polarity if you really want to max out a Warframe, with a couple exceptions. There are certain Warframes where you have to commit to a aura slot if you want to do their like most optimal build. I think you have to do that with Chroma, but I could be wrong. But yeah, don't usually commit to a dash polarity. Just forma your Warframe some more, go to like 5 forma in that sucker, and have a blank polarity, and then it'll give you more flexibility for when you're not doing super high level content. Plus, I like running sprint boost occasionally. It's really good for like spy vaults and stuff. Yeah. Okay, thank you all for watching. Yakri out.